So welcome everyone to our webinar today and our Kent Community Foundation launch of our new environmental strategy. And for anyone who doesn't know, today, the 22nd of April, is World Earth Day. So we thought it was appropriate that we would use this day and that anniversary to launch our new environmental strategy. My name is Josephine McCartney and I am Chief Executive of Kent Community Foundation. For those of you who don't know who Kent Community Foundation is, we are an independent grant maker in the county, and it is our purpose to connect people who care with local causes that matter. This year is also our 20th anniversary, and in that time we have distributed more than £43 million to good causes across Kent and Medway. At KCF, we believe that local community action can be at the heart of delivering solutions that not only minimise the impact on the environment, but also offer additional benefits that people and the local communities can reap. And in partnership with donors and the local voluntary and community sector, we believe that we can facilitate dynamic change in our own backyard. Our new strategy encompasses 4 key areas. The first one for us is philanthropic, and that's about providing a sustainable source of income for our new environmental grant making fund. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Our ethical investment policy, and that's about continuing to move to a more sustainable investment portfolio in line with our charitable objectives. The third strand is our grant making strategy, and we will be launching our new environmental theme, which we'll be doing later on this year. And for those of you who don't know how community foundations work, we have to raise the money before we can give it out. So our initial part is raising the money, and the second part is making sure that it goes to those organisations that are making a difference across our county. And the fourth part of our strategy is about our own organisational change. So I do believe that we have to have the courage of our convictions and the way that we operate as an organisation, and our policies and our behaviour, in ensuring that we are as environmentally friendly as we possibly can be. And that is our commitment really, and it will be ongoing from today. So this is absolutely the launch. And also we hope that we really can make a difference with the work that we do. So as I was saying, I'll say a little bit more about the Environmental Fund at the end of the webinar, but in the meantime, I would like to introduce you to Andy Garland, presenter of BBC Radio Kent's Sunday Gardening Show, and to Viv Hunt, who is Head Gardener at Godinton House. And I would like to just take this opportunity, Viv, I'm not sure if you know this, but Gardener House have been a financial supporter of Kent Community Foundation for many years, and I just want to say thank you for that and recognise that commitment to us and to the county. Thank you. So before I hand over to Andy and Viv, I'm going to share some lovely photos and videos which Andy has put together, and Viv. And it's relevant obviously to our talk today. And the first 2 photographs that you will see on the screen in a minute are 2 beautiful pictures of Godinton House gardens, and obviously that's thanks to Viv and her team for that. So I am now going to attempt to share my screen, so bear with me everyone, and hopefully this works and it's fine.
If you want to share just the first photo, Josephine, because that shows you what a lovely office that Viv has. I know you and I are mainly office based, you at KCF and me at the BBC, and Viv, of course, has the most glorious of office spaces. So I thought it would be quite nice for us to see the first slide, which is...
And can you see that, Andy?
I can't see it at the moment.
Right.
I don't know if people at the webinar can, but anyway, it's a case of...
Let me find it.
Thank you, Rosalind. They can't see it yet either. So we'll get the technology working.
We will get the tech right.
So Viv, why don't you start by just telling us about the amazing place that is Godinton House and Gardens, where you are lucky enough to work?
Well, it is, yeah, fantastic. And I have to say that I've been here for 22 years and I still really appreciate working in a place like this. We are, that's our, I think if everyone can see that, that's our walled garden. If you visit the gardens, you start with the very formal part of the garden, which surrounds the house. We've got a big Jacobean mansion house. And we've got a little bit of everything here, really. There's the formal lawns, lots of topiary, a lovely big formal pond. And then you move into about 3 acres of wild garden, which we have been really sort of working on and developing over the years. And we also have a lovely little intimate walled Italian garden. And then the sort of last hurrah is this fabulous walled kitchen garden, which again we've sort of been developing over the last 20 years, and is planted now with sort of a mixed planting of cut flowers, and we grow sort of potager beds of vegetables. We've got fruit trees. We just do a little bit of everything, which is great.
Not that we're at all jealous of you walking out to that view every morning. If we get over the next slide, Josephine, please. I feel like Boris Johnson asking for the next slide, or JVT, or Chris Whitty. So this is my own personal garden. No, I wish it was, really. So this is the garden where I am a trustee. So as well as presenting BBC Radio Kent's Sunday gardening programme, I'm also a trustee, not very far away from Viv, just up the M20, at St Mary's Platt, just off junction 3 of the M20 at Rootham Heath. This is Great Comp Garden, which as it stands right now is 7 acres, and primarily the work of Eric and Joy Cameron, who sadly are no longer with us, but moved into the house in 1957. Eric was a civil engineer and was on the train one day going up north and happened to pick up a copy of Country Life at the station and saw this advert for Great Comp, which kind of was a big house that had fallen a little bit into disrepair, but decided that he and Joy were going to move from Clapham, and they did, and they began to create a garden. They weren't huge gardeners at that point, but as he says, he learned a lot. And since 1982, he created a charitable trust as they had no children, and on his death, the trust inherited the house and gardens, and it's now run as a public garden, open now through until November. And like Viv at Godinton, it's got several different areas. There's quite a bit of tree cover. We've got some formal areas. You can see here the square looking across to our hot border. Behind us, as we see in this photo, you'd see a cool coloured border with sort of muted purples and blues, but this is the kind of fiery hot border just before it really comes into its own. But you can see some Nyphophia there, the red hot pokers, the Achillea, which is the sort of yellow flat flowers there, rising to about 4 feet high towards the back of the border. And our Mount Etna broom there, the yellow tree in the background, which Eric, he served in World War II in Italy, didn't see when he climbed Mount Etna, but he bought himself a Mount Etna broom, and there it is in all its glory. So that's the garden that I'm involved with, and we'll talk a little bit about as well. But Viv and I thought we'd talk kind of about 3 areas in the next few minutes: gardening and well-being, gardening for all, and also gardening and the environment. Very appropriate, of course, as it's Earth Day. But we thought we'd start about talking about gardening for well-being, because we've all been through a pretty tough time over the last year. Both our gardens were closed for a period of time in the initial outbreak, and then reopened and are back open now. And Viv, you've been talking to lots of visitors about the positive impact that visiting garden spaces like Godinton and Great Comp have had?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, the last few years, people have been doing a lot more sort of looking at how beneficial just being outdoors is. And it's really hit home over the last year. And all of our visitors who are coming into the gardens now are just really appreciative of being in some outdoor space. And I know last summer, particularly after the first lockdown, people just wanted to be somewhere that they felt really safe, and just, you know, getting out and about. We were having lots more people using our footpaths around the estate, because we've got the garden is set in quite a large estate here with farmland. So I think people are just so much more aware of the benefits, not just sort of physically, but just mentally. And I did say to you, Andy, the other day that I overheard somebody walking past and talking to his wife, and just saying that it made him feel good to be alive, to be walking around the gardens here. And really, that's just all we need to hear, really. You know, that's just such a huge compliment to the work we're doing here. So yeah, lovely to share it with other people.
No, absolutely. Do you do any work in terms of well-being for groups visiting the garden in a kind of formal sense, either courses or anything like that?
We're sort of thinking of doing some more of making the garden sort of even more beneficial, by creating spaces in the wild garden for people to sit, which we haven't done before. And we're all sort of rather interested in the idea of what do they call it? Tree bathing, I think, when you go into forests and, you know, there's spaces specifically to encourage you just to sit down and enjoy the environment. So we'd like to do a little bit more of that. I mean, certainly I feel that you know, having a wild area within the garden makes such a big difference, and obviously it's bringing in lots of wildlife, which also adds to the whole sort of experience. But we're just, yeah, trying to encourage people to come and use the facilities of the gardens in all sorts of different ways. So we do workshops here. We had been getting local schools involved. Obviously that's come to a stop at the moment, but hopefully that'll all get going, and we're doing a bit of sort of outreach to schools at the moment as well. So yeah, I mean, really, we're just sort of trying to make sure that we're involving the local community in particular as much as we can.
It's hugely important. So if we can move on to the next video, Josephine, please. We embarked on a little project at Great Comp 2 years ago, and I just want to show you this little short video from one of our trustees, David Chesover. David is a GP. He was also adult mental health lead up until very recently for Kent, and we invited a group of veterans who live at the Royal British Legion Industries Village at Aylesford to come and work in the garden for their own benefit.
Okay, I shall. Hopefully you will be able to all hear this as well. I've set all the sound, so we'll give this a go. It's gone.
So we can't hear any of the audio at the moment, but what I can tell you is this is an area called the Bamboozlery at Great Comp, and this was the area that was cleared by the veterans and planted up with a huge range of different bamboos. Now, when some of those veterans arrived in the garden, they were incredibly nervous and, you know, struggling, some of them with their own mental health, but a lot of them got a lot of benefits from coming to work in the garden. If you don't know it, it's a very quiet, personal space, quite enclosed with all the kind of tree cover, and they really enjoyed the experience. And the Bamboozlery is yet to be kind of formally opened, but we're hoping that Dame Kelly Holmes may open it for us in the not too distant future when it's safe to do so. And we're going to be inviting more of the veterans back into the garden. We are really following on from work from a couple of charities that have already done this sort of thing. One called Gardening Leave, sadly closed just recently, but they had been doing a lot of work with veterans in walled garden environments, very much like the one that you saw at Godinton a few minutes ago. And one of the reasons that walled gardens are so effective is that they provide a very enclosed space and a protected space where the veterans, many of whom are suffering PTSD, find themselves very secure. Because they can see the boundaries quite clearly, and it creates a kind of safe, calming environment for them. And there are other charities who are working in the sort of horticultural therapy field, and just hugely, hugely important. And something that has come to the fore much more recently is, of course, social prescribing, with horticultural therapy being at the forefront of that. And if we move on to the next slide, Josephine, there's a very short video from Charing Village, just up the road from Viv at Godinton, who have set up their own gardening group as part of the GP surgery practice. And this film is 5 years old, so this was 2016 when I recorded this little piece. But they have invited people who are registered with the surgery and who may be lonely or on their own and not have much company to come and be a part of this gardening group. So there's a social aspect to it, but there's also a big growing aspect to it as well.
Thanks, Andy. And for everyone listening, this is the type of project that we would also consider funding. So it's lots of community type activity and projects and gardens and green space that the wider community can also enjoy at any time. So this is subtitled as well, Andy. So if the volume doesn't work, the subtitles will come up anyway. So we'll give this one a go.
So you can see they've got these lovely raised beds which have been created alongside the surgery building. And they've also got ornamental areas as well. And we're going to come on and talk about wildlife a little bit later on. But those beds were absolutely alive with pollinating insects and bees and so on. And this is Joanne Monroe, who's one of the kind of leading lights of the group, which they've won an award for as well. And they've also been sort of held up as best practice for this type of local group and local initiative. And I chatted to quite a few of the people who were there and taking part, and they were absolutely passionate about it, really, really enthusiastic. They loved coming along each week. And they're actually transforming, as you can see, they're actually areas of the surgery grounds which had been sort of fairly uninteresting up until that point. And so you can see it's a really good example. Coming back to that point that Viv made a few minutes ago about the chap that said, that it gave him a reason to be alive. Dr. William Bird is a Berkshire GP who's done a lot of work in in terms of green spaces and the positive impacts of gardening and the environment on our health. And you can read lots of his stuff online, but this is just a kind of example, talking about allotment gardening, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, I'm sure, just about how good it is at making us feel better about ourselves and our lives. And a bit like the Charing Gardening Group, really providing a lovely space and environment and contributing to good mental health as well. Viv, I don't know if you want to come in on the sort of green space, benefits of green space and benefits of being in a garden and gardening.
Well, I mean, I think it sort of goes without saying that we all know that, just being outdoors or working in a garden has that sort of meditative effect. And it certainly keeps you physically strong as well. And there's been an awful lot of research done into this for all sorts of different areas. So people who are looking at lots of sort of urban renewal and all the sort of building side of it, they're having to look at whether they should have community spaces or whether people need to have their own little space of garden. So, I mean, I think everyone does understand how important it is. We looking at the volunteers who were helping at up at Charing Surgery. We have a lovely team of volunteers who finally, after a year away, are going to be coming back to us next week. And they come for all sorts of different reasons. So for some of them, it is just a social thing, and they just enjoy being part of a sort of bigger project than their own gardens. We also have lots of people who join us for maybe a sort of shorter time, helping out and while they're learning and looking at making a change of career and going into gardening. And that's something that I'm always really keen to encourage people, because it was a second career for me. And I just absolutely love it. And I think there's so much opportunity in garden. There's so much sort of variety in gardening. So that side of it, I'm very keen to be encouraging people to take it up as a career. And we do have trainees here at Godinton as well. So yeah, we sort of see it from all different sides.
Yeah, which takes us nicely into this theme of gardening for all. If you want to spin on the slides, Josephine, please, we can see a couple of Viv's lovely volunteers who will be back very shortly, and the lovely glass house there in the walled garden at Godinton. And there are some of our volunteers, fairly newly formed at Great Comp. We've not had volunteers for very long, but we've certainly got a nice volunteering team. We started off with a few open days for volunteers to come along, and now we have a regular team. And there's an interesting school of thought, Viv, and I don't know, I mean, you have volunteers, so I think I know where you stand on this, but I know one or two head gardeners in Kent don't like using volunteers because they like to be able to maintain their garden to a standard with the staff that they have, and they feel that if they have volunteers, they are, they could overextend themselves.
We've had a few accidents, I have to say.
Tell us more.
Well, no, I wouldn't like to, but yeah, I mean, you have to accept that you're either sort of fairly closely supervising, or we did lose a magnolia tree, a very small magnolia tree, which got mistaken for a weed somehow.
Yeah.
And you do, sort of the little niceties of knowing exactly what is a weed seedling and what are the plants you want, can be sort of overlooked. But yeah, you just have to be supervising, and everyone, all of the volunteers are really keen to learn very often, and also really aware of their lack of knowledge. Some are almost too afraid to be touching the borders, but And we get all sorts of different people with different skills. We had one lovely chap who used to just come and do path edging, which was great. I mean, that's what you need. So yes, it's always, you know, helpful. Plus you then have a lovely team of people around who are often willing to come and help with other events as well. So yeah, it's just nice to have that community on hand, really.
So it provides one way for people that don't have a lot of outdoor space to come and enjoy beautiful garden spaces in gardens like ours. But something that Josephine has already alluded to are, of course, community groups, and Viv has as well, community groups and community gardens. And we have lots of them doing really amazing work here in Kent. And if you're watching, you may be involved in some of them. And clearly, as a community garden, you could be benefiting maybe from the KCF new environmental fund. I'm sure Josephine will touch on that in a while. If you want to spin on, Josephine, I think, Viv, your team have been to visit one community garden just this week. This is a community garden in Ashford, and here are some of the people involved with it.
Yes, one of our trainees this year is particularly interested in getting involved in community gardens, and he's just started a course. So he and a couple of the other gardeners here went to visit the Limes down in Ashford. And of course, we always want to have links with these sort of local groups, partly so that we can, you know, we're really happy to share plants. I think most gardeners always are. And we've always got a little bit of surplus of seedlings when we're sowing stuff for the veg garden. So we've been involved in school gardens as well, and it's just nice to be able to share plants.
Oh, sorry, Andy, you're on mute.
We've lost you, Andy.
I'm back. The next community garden we've got to show you is the other end of the county in Sidcup. And this is absolutely a beautiful space. I've only come across it quite recently. I judged it for Kent Life magazine Community Garden of the Year. And it's a former, again, walled garden that had fallen into disrepair, was attached to a significant house in Sidcup that's now a big pub, just out of shot in this photo. But you can see that the volunteers have turned it into this amazing space. And it's really a thoroughfare. You can see the paths there. This is the central seating area around the garden. They meet on a Saturday morning for a couple of hours. But people who are visiting the hospital nearby and residential homes, they come and sit in the garden, and they really get those benefits of well-being that we've been talking about already from this space. So this is Sidcup Community Garden. And if we move on, another garden in Kent, again, which has won several awards for its work with all different groups, is the Abbey Physic Garden in Faversham. Some of you may know it. 25 years old, I think 26 or 27 now. They just celebrated their 25th anniversary, and they have a men's shed within the garden. They have gardening courses for people with learning difficulties. They have got a bereavement group that meet in the garden. They have people coming to do yoga in the garden. They have local beekeepers who keep bees and they make honey. And they have a local food sort of cafe where people can learn to make their own, you know, nutritious food. So it's an absolutely amazing place. If you ever get the chance to visit, I heartily recommend it to you, the Abbey Physic Community Garden in Faversham.
Andy,
Josephine, you're nodding there. Clearly it's someone, a group that you know.
It is, yes, clearly, yeah, and have supported them for many years. So I'm glad you used that as one of your examples, Andy. That's a great example.
And one quick more one to have a look at, again, at the other end of the county. This is the Windmill Community Garden in Margate. It's attached to the local Millmead Children's Centre in the town. It's in a, well, I'll be honest, a none too salubrious part of Margate. It's a couple of miles away from all of the Margate regeneration around the Turner and the Old Town. And interestingly, this is the most central location where local people can actually get access to fresh fruit and veg. It's closer than any of their local supermarkets. So it's a place where people can actually stock up with local produce as well as grow their own, and they do a veg box scheme as well. So that's the Windmill Community Garden in Margate. Viv, in terms of gardening for all, you mentioned career changes, and the Working for Gardeners Association and the RAGS scheme is something that I just wanted to touch on. I know you've had RAGS trainees at Godinton in the past, career changes and people that want to get into horticulture.
Yeah, we're now working with the Professional Gardeners Guild, who send us either one, or this year we've been lucky enough to have 2 trainees, and that's the difference there is that it tends to be younger people actually who are using that training, because they're moving around to different parts of the country. They do 3 different placements over 3 years, so that tends to be younger people, which is nice as well. In the past we have had RAGS trainees, and then we did our own sort of training program, and that was before we had any accommodation, so it meant that it was local people. It tended to be sort of people who were coming into it slightly more at a mature age, like I did. So yeah, we've had a good sort of mixture of people sort of using our facilities to do some training. Often people are doing the RHS courses, and those you can do either at local colleges or do them online, use distance learning, which seems to work quite well for people. So yeah, bit of a mixture we've had here at Godinton.
If you ping on the next slide, Josephine, you'll see a quote from one of Viv's contemporaries, Graham Watts, who's the head gardener up at Belmont. Again, beautiful garden just outside Faversham. And again, Graham has RAGS trainees there. It used to be called the RAGS scheme, Women Returning to Amenity Gardening. It's just open to all now. And, you know, as career changes, it's a scheme to get people into horticulture or who want to get into horticulture. We had Alison, who's the Southeast manager for RAGS, on the show a few weeks ago, and what they're desperate for right now, and if you're part of watching this webinar, you might be able to help, is that they are very keen to have more gardens in Kent where trainees can come and train. I think they've got a waiting list, or quite a significant waiting list of trainees, but they don't have the gardens in which to train them. And you need to be a sort of keen hands-on garden owner, or maybe you have a garden and have a gardener who can work alongside the trainees. But if you speak to Alison at the RAGS scheme at WFGA, she would love to hear from you if you have such a garden. And just finally, on picking up on your topic, Viv, about getting youngsters into gardening, I spent a term or 2 working alongside my daughters when they were in primary school, and getting young people into horticulture is really important, both into the industry, but of course making our youngsters aware of plants and gardens and the benefits that they bring. And if we spin on to the next slide, the RHS campaign for school gardening, doing great work in that field, lots of information online and resources. So if you're involved in school gardens, you might want to, if you haven't already, check that out. But Viv, I don't know if you feel that actually if you've got a very keen teacher, whichever school they're in, they tend to provide the catalyst to get our young people gardening in school gardens and elsewhere.
Yes, absolutely. Quite a few of our local schools now are doing much more sort of gardening on site, and having either after school gardening clubs, maybe growing a bit of food for the school, which is lovely. And I was really surprised when we first started having school groups visiting Godinton, particularly with the older kids. I thought, oh, they're not really going to be that interested in the gardens. And actually they all are. They were all really sort of excited about gardens. They love you know, if I get them to taste things or smell an onion leaf, or they're all just really interested to seeing things like the peaches, which are just starting now in the glass house, because they've been, you know, they can come and see the bees actually pollinating the flowers. And then on some of the other trees, they can see where the fruits are just starting to form below the flowers. So all of that sort of thing, where everything really connects, is, you know, the children are really interested in. So that's always exciting to be a bit involved in that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What would be your top tip to get youngsters into gardening?
I think definitely maybe food. We all like to be able to eat what we're growing, and just maybe growing something unusual, I guess they're keen on, and being able to sort of involve wildlife in the garden. They like to see all the sort of creatures and the insects that that come along with gardening. We've got a little tank at the moment of tadpoles in our glass house, and it's such a long time since since I was at school watching tadpoles develop. So we're all really quite interested to see that. But that sort of thing, you know, if you have a bit of water as well, and you can involve all of that with gardening, then I think that's the way to get younger people interested. But they don't need much encouragement, to be honest.
Let's spin on to our next slide. So I think you've got another little feature at Godinton, and we'll look at some of your water in a moment. This is quite a creation that you have. Tell us about this.
This is the Godinton Bug Hotel. So that, I mean, I think lots of people now have in their gardens, maybe it's something with the sort of drilled out canes for bees. And you can see at the bottom of there, we've got some logs with just various holes drilled out. And a lot of those are filled up now with, I think the bees are actually laying their eggs in there, and then they sort of plug them up. But yeah, we're hoping to get all sorts of beneficial insects living in there over winter. So ladybirds, lacewings, all the sort of creatures that will help us in the garden, to help us to be dealing naturally with the pests.
Let's move on to the next slide, because we can see some more of your work in terms of your sort of environmental approach at Godinton. Are you purely organic there, Viv, or are you pragmatically organic?
We're not. We are very much sort of mixed. We have got miles of gravel paths, which we still do. We don't do so much spraying of them actually, but we do have to do a bit of spraying to keep them clean. But generally this is a sort of demonstration bed that one of our trainees was particularly keen to do this year in the walled garden, which is showing the no-dig method. So he has put down, first of all, some paper, and then you put a lovely big layer of compost over the top of it. And if you have this sort of little system of paths, it means that you haven't got to tread on the ground, you won't be compacting the soil, has all sorts of benefits. And it also makes gardening much easier, and doing it with this sort of method, there's much less weeding. The soil structure works really well. If you've got a sort of bit of rough ground or grass where you want to start a new veg bed, this is the perfect way to do it. And you haven't got to dig over, so it's sort of it's not using the old method of double digging, which all of us have sort of wrecked our backs doing. So for anybody who is starting out gardening with a bit of a bad back, this is the way to do it, definitely.
Anything that protects my back is a good thing. You've mentioned water, Viv. One of the key attributes of attracting wildlife into your garden. Here's something obviously on a very domestic scale, but it can be even smaller than that. There are some lovely tutorials on YouTube with people just taking a plastic storage crate sinking that into the ground. Key point, as always, with any pond is to make an area where any wildlife that get into the pond can actually get out. So you need to have that in your storage container. But even that very small couple of feet square area of water in the garden can be really beneficial in attracting wildlife into the garden. Viv's water, of course, at Godinton is quite a bit larger than this domestic scale pond. Let's have a little look. If we can.
Got several of them, yeah.
Well, here's one, Viv. Tell us what's going on here.
Yes, the endless task of removing algae, I'm afraid. And the first few years that I was working here at Godinton, that was sort of one of the things that I thought, okay, we've got to be able to sort this out so that we don't get algae growing in the ponds. And we tried all sorts of different things. There were sort of ground up minerals you could put in. We tried straw bales. We tried lavender in one of the other ponds, and nothing made much difference. And I spoke to somebody at Wisley where they've got a huge sort of water lily canal there, and they said, oh well, yeah, we just go in every morning and clear the algae out. So I thought, oh okay, so that's what we do. We don't go in every morning, and it is usually just for a shortish part of the year when it's warming up in the sun in the spring. And we have planted lots more water lilies so that they will cover the surface, but yeah, that comes with it. If you get a pond, keeping it clean, keeping it well sort of balanced, especially if it's quite shallow and you can see the depth of that pond. It's just not deep enough to keep the water temperatures down, and sort of keep it healthy. So we do have to keep clearing out that lovely algae that goes on our compost heap and then gets put on the borders. So
and is there a reason that you've got it stacked on the side of the pond? Why is that important to do that for a day or two before you get rid of it?
We're just making sure that anything that's living in there can get back into the pond before we take it to the compost heap, because of course, yes, there's lots of life in the pond. So and we do really love our dragonflies, and we have a lot of those in the various different ponds here. So yeah, we want to look after them.
Okay, let's move on to our next slide. Kent Wildlife Trust have got a really helpful and informative section of their website. It used to be called Wild About Gardens, and they've tied it into their new thrust on Wild Kent, but lots of information, resources. They have a wildlife gardening competition. I'm sure you know Kent Wildlife Trust if you're on the webinar, based at Tyland Barn, just at the bottom of Bluebell Hill between Chatham and Maidstone. And they've produced a big report into wildlife and particularly insect life in our gardens, and are encouraging all gardeners really to try and not to spray at all, or to spray as minimally as possible. If you just move on a slide, Josephine, please. They commissioned this report from Dave Golson, who's Professor of Biology at the University of Sussex, and he is going to be talking about it in a webinar for the Gardens Trust, of which the Kent Gardens Trust are a part. That's next Tuesday. If you just spin on a slide, Josephine, very, very interesting talk, I suspect, next Tuesday, as you can see via Zoom. And again, talking about the decline of insects and pollinating insects in our gardens, and what we as gardeners can do. He's a really interesting man and a very knowledgeable man, so I heartily recommend that to you next Tuesday. But lots of information from Kent Wildlife Trust, as well as encouraging us domestic gardeners to do as much as they can. They're also doing a lot of work on our roadside verges. They've created roadside nature reserves. Again, going up Bluebell Hill, you'll see the yellow signs on the verges in the side of the road. There are very unusual orchids growing in some of these verges, but also, of course, traditional native British flowers as well. They've got bee roads in other parts of Kent to encourage our native bee species, but all really part of linking environments up. I think we've got 23 million gardens across the UK, and if we can join them up from a wildlife point of view, then that clearly gives us a great acreage where wildlife and pollinating insects can thrive and survive. And we need to link those separate areas of habitat up in order to create these much wider and bigger areas. And we as domestic gardeners have got a kind of huge part to play in that. That is it from Viv and myself in terms of talking about gardening, but we are more than happy to answer your questions right now. And I think we've already got some of them coming in.
No, we have. So there's some on the side, but one question is, I have a small pond and have struggled to keep it clear of a lot of green slimy weed algae. We've talked about that. I've tried various guaranteed products to clear it, but nothing seems to make it go away. So I think what you answered earlier, Viv, I think that there may not be an easy answer to it. I think it's clearing it.
I mean, you can improve it by making sure that you've got some sort of oxygenating weeds in there. So adding the curly pondweed helps. Having a bit of sort of shade or cover over the surface of the pond, so growing a some water lily in there helps to cover the surface. So there are things that you can do to make it healthier. You can't, obviously, if it's a small pond, you can't change the depth of it, but yeah, you can add other things to help. But otherwise, yeah, I'm afraid you may have to just accept, sort of pulling out some of the algae every so often.
Brilliant. Okay, so this is another question which is in the chat. So people are putting them in the Q&A in the chat. So the question is, what do you suggest I do with my silver grey shrubs, such as Santolina? And now I don't know how you pronounce that one. And it just looks like if the frost has killed them, cut them back for now, replace them, or leave them.
The Ceanothus is, the Santolina and Ceanothus.
Oh, right, okay. I'm just having a look now. Yes, cut them back. You can check whether some of the shrubs may have actually been killed altogether, I'm afraid. So the thing to do is just to scratch a little bit of the bark off the stem low down, and if it's green, it's alive. If it's not green, it's dead, is basically the rule of thumb. But if you think you have got a little bit of life left in it, and just because all the foliage has died, it may be able to recover. We've got a couple of things we're clinging on to and hoping will recover. So yeah, maybe just sort of hold off for a bit, but you can trim them back to, if it's just the top of the foliage that's died off, then yeah, trim them back. And we are now, sort of pretty happy that we're near the end of the coldest frost. So we're doing a lot of the sort of things that we held off on. We are now cutting back things like the penstemons that, we leave until the worst of the cold weather is over. So yeah, anything that's just been a bit browned off, give it a trim over, or check that it isn't dead right down to the roots.
I'm the last person to ask about Ceanothus, because having been advised by Jean and Steve, my gardening experts on the show, not to prune Ceanothus too heavily, I decided to ignore their advice, and lo and behold, after I had pruned it too heavily, it absolutely went belly up and went to the great compost heap in the sky. So don't ask me about Ceanothus. My advice on Ceanothus is listen to an expert and don't ignor them.
Yeah, Ceanothus leave until after it's flowered, later in the year, and never cut back to below where you've got some foliage.
I have a question, Andy, and it's about, is there a sunflower competition for children with BBC Radio Kent? Someone's just asking that question. I didn't know if you might know the answer to that.
No, we haven't done our own sunflower competition, but I know, you know, there are lots of local groups that do, you know, do biggest sunflower competitions. Again, great little plant to get youngsters into gardening with. Of course, you can kind of measure them against it and send photos to Granny and Grandad, and get Granny and Grandad growing one as well, and see who gets the biggest one. So it's a really, you know, great little thing to do with youngsters. And of course, at the end of the flowering season, you've got a great source of food for the birds as well. I've been trying to work in the conservatory this morning, and I've just been distracted hugely by the bird life that's on the feeders at the moment. Lots more than I've had actually ever before in the garden. We've had food out since about the big garden bird watch in January, and the birds that have come into garden have just absolutely fantastic. It's been great, but very distracting when you're trying to work.
Thanks very much. Another question in the chat then. So, hello Viv and Andy, can you recommend any tulip varieties which do well in Kent clay? I have some come back every year and others that disappear. Vanilla cream, Carnival de Nice do really well, for example.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just some tulips are longer lived than others. One of the ones that I've been showing to our trainees recently are some of the smaller, more still sort of better connected to the species, and they are much more likely to be long-lived in your soil. So there are things like the Hagari is the species. We've got one called Splendor, which is a beautiful little orange one. They're much smaller than the much more cultivated species, but they are more likely to naturalize. We've got another one called Little Beauty, which is a little pink one with a purple center, and that one does just seem to naturalize, and you get more and more of them. But yeah, otherwise you just have to check. Some of them are really very perennial, and some of them you would expect to just replace every year.
I grow a lot of the Darwin tulips, so red, Holland's Glory, I find works really well for me, and I don't dig them up, I leave them in the ground. Pink Impression is another Darwin tulip, and there is a yellow which is in my garden at the moment which looks absolutely stunning, and I've got orange Darwin tulips as well. So I find the Darwin ones go really well. Key points of course is, you know, if you've got very wet ground, they'll probably rot, so you need fairly well drained soil to leave them in the ground. And obviously just deadhead the flowering head once it's gone over, leave the green stem because that's photosynthesizing and making energy for the bulb, and obviously leave all the leaves until they die right back. If you have a lot of them like I do, of course it does make the garden look a little bit scruffy after tulip flowering time for a while, but it's well worth it of course because it feeds the bulb then for the following season. Do you foliar feed, Viv, any of your tulips?
No, we've just got too many to be doing that. I mean, we would feed the garden by mulching. We make lots of compost every year, and then we try to do as much mulching of the borders with a nice layer of that compost, and that is sort of the main feed that we give the garden each year. But also you could, if you've got very heavy clay, you could add a little bit of grit to the garden when you're planting. That may help to sort of prolong their life as well.
Thanks very much both. So that's all the main questions on gardening, but I have had a lot of comments in the chat which people can obviously see, but just highlighting some of the other organisations that do community gardens. So there's Community Grow in Ditton, and we fund Community Grow in Ditton. And then the spade.
Yeah, they're going to be on the show quite soon. Hopefully, I was due to visit, excellent. But of course, the first pandemic put paid to my visit, so it is on my list of places to go. But I see someone's mentioned Spadework, which is about a mile down the road from me, actually, and that's a marvelous place. And if you look very closely in front of one of the trees in front of the farm shop, you'll see a little plaque from one of our former Radio Kent gardeners, Bob Collard, who was our gardener for many years at Radio Kent. up until his retirement in the mid-90s, and he planted that tree there at Spadework as well.
I mean, and that's the sort of thing. And then there's other projects we're talking about. Bee Change in Aylsham, it's another local charity. And I think the thing for us is that part of the reason why we wanted to launch our environmental strategy was also really because we know from the research that we carried out that actually only 4% of all donations that go to the voluntary sector in the country, not just Kent, go to environmental, gardening and natural projects. And part of what we would like to do at Kent Community Foundation is to make a commitment to increase that percentage. So we want to be able to ensure that more of the money that we generate from donations goes back into those sorts of projects. And just to give you a little bit more of an understanding of the kind of projects that we are looking to support, and it covers, pond, looking after ponds. It also is about clearing pathways. It's also around encouraging more planting of trees in an organised way. It's also about the beach cleans and the litter picks and anything really that helps to improve our natural environment. So we will be encouraging organisations to apply to us for funding later on in the year, but it does cover quite a wide variety of projects. So not just community gardens, but it's been excellent to focus on that today and have obviously the expertise of Viv, and also Andy, even though I know you will say you're an amateur, but you do have a lot of knowledge. Otherwise you wouldn't be hosting the gardening show on BBC Radio Kent. So I really appreciate both your time today to come and have a chat and share some of those wonderful photographs as well. That kind of brings it all to life, doesn't it, and helps people to understand more about what a beautiful county that we have in Kent, and that we should definitely do more to look after it. So we will share after the event the link to our new environmental fund if you would like to donate to that, and we'll share that. But it's on our website, which is allthews.kentcf.org.uk, and if you go onto our website, it is one of the first things you see, and it's on our carousel. So please go in and have a look, and there's more information on there about how you can engage with us, how we can help you engage in your local communities too, especially around the environment, the natural environment, gardening, and just keeping our county alive in the way that we love it and see it and enjoy it. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. It's 2 minutes to go. Just some other comments from people on the side, but do have a look at the chat. As I said, we will be recording, we have recorded all of this and we will share it. So all of the other information and events that Andy mentioned throughout the webinar are on those slides, and we will share those slides as well. Andy, can I just leave the last 2 minutes for final comments from you and Viv, please?
Well, the first thing I would say is go and visit Viv at Godinton. It took me a really long time to get there, but now, since I've been there, I absolutely love the place. It is just the most beautiful garden. And similarly, it took me a long time to visit Belmont, just up the road from Viv, Graham's garden at Belmont and Faversham. And to my shame, I had to admit to Lucy Dawes recently that I'd not been to visit Mount Ephraim, again, just outside Faversham. So I suppose lockdown has, made us focus a little bit on our immediate locales and what's on offer. And, I'm looking forward to visiting Viv in person again as soon as I'm allowed to. Do come and see us at Great Comp. We're open. You don't need to book in advance. We'd love to see you. And obviously, I would love you to listen Sundays, 10 o'clock to BBC Radio Kent. That's what you have to do if you've signed up to this webinar. It's the law.
Thanks, Andy. Viv, last word to you then.
Yes, well, we're always very happy to see more visitors coming to the gardens here. And I would just say to any of the people who are looking at setting up community gardens or working in them, that I'm also very happy to talk to you about sharing plants or ideas. So feel free to get in touch.
Wonderful, thank you. You would think that was orchestrated, wouldn't you? Bang on 1 o'clock. Well done. Thanks again. Thanks everyone for joining
thanks,
us.
Josephine.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye bye then.